Hello everyone, my name is Dan and I make sporadic Warhammer 40k content. I hope you like the new studio we have. The plants are fake and all the notes I have are empty. Today we're going to be talking about how to play Warhammer 40k faster. Now you may be wondering, why does it matter how fast I play a game of Warhammer 40k? And if you're not playing at a competitive tournament with chess clocks, then it really doesn't matter. But I do want to share with you a brief story from the most recent Las Vegas Open in 2022. So chess clocks are becoming more and more prominent at 40k tournaments. Essentially what happens is you have a clock with two levers on either side and about an hour and 15 minutes between both players. Every time you're rolling dice, making decisions or things like that, your time is slowly ticking down. And when you're done with your turn or whatever you're doing, you hit the lever and the timer starts ticking down on your opponent's turn. If you run out of time, then you can no longer roll dice. And that helps prevent people from slow playing and trying to end games prematurely by wearing out everyone's time so that your opponent can't do anything. Because with a chess clock, you know who's taking more or less time. So in Siegler's last game, he made a little bit of a mistake in turning over the chess clock to his opponent. So in other words, even though his opponent was playing, his time was ticking down, and at something like at the last turn of the game, he had a minute left on the chess clock. Now his opponent was nice enough to realize that Richard had made a mistake and essentially gave him some of his own time. But at the end of the day, that opponent didn't need to do that, and it was a show of great sportsmanship because Richard had made that little mistake. So there Siegler was almost about to lose the biggest game of the entire year because his chess clock was going to hit zero. So if it can happen to pro players, it can happen to you too. So today we're going to be talking about how we can better use our time in a game of Warhammer 40k in order to make sure that we don't get beaten by the clock. There's essentially 4 different things that you do over the course of an entire game. The first one is thinking about your game, strategizing, and eventually deciding on what you're going to do. The second thing is moving all of your models. The third is rolling dice and rerolls included and things like that. And then finally, number 4 is kind of rules disputes or rules checking. Some people are faster and slower in all of those different categories based on their own experiences or the army they play. It's important to know where you stand on all those different categories and what might be costing you time in a game. So my recommendation for you is to test yourself. So everyone who has a smartphone or any phone like that can essentially just put in a timer or a stopwatch and kind of pause themselves when in a normal competitive game they would hit the timer over to their opponent. So you don't need to use a chess clock or have your opponent have to deal with it. You can test yourself in your own games. And what you want to figure out is, are you someone who plays too fast or are you someone who tends to play too slow? The first tournament that I ever played on that I played a chess clock with, I was so nervous about running out of time that I was blazing through every single thing I did, and I ended the game with something like 35 minutes or about half of my time left on the clock. And I had been making stupid rules mistakes and just playing way too fast and loose because I thought I was going to time out, when in reality I'm someone who plays too fast. So the first step of this is to test yourself honestly and then even ask your opponent at the end of the game, hey, where did you see of these 4 categories that I could have sped up? Or what was the biggest time sink when I was playing my game? So now let's get into the specific categories and my tips for you on how we can speed up. The first category is that strategizing and deciding part. So whenever I go into a game of Warhammer 40k, I already have kind of a game plan that is kind of my standard game plan that I deviate from. You know, if you watch chess players who are playing games like blitz chess or speed chess and things like that, they'll actually essentially have maybe the first 10 to 15 moves memorized as a response to their opponent. So there's almost no thinking that goes on for the first, beginning portion of the game. It's just kind of memorization and following the plan. You want to get to a similar place with your own models and your own playstyle. So right now I play Thousand Suns, and I know that my kind of standard secondaries that I go with: mutate landscape, retrieve Nachman data, and engage on all fronts. And so I know my first plays have to kind of go around those secondaries. So one of my 5-man rubric squads will do Rod or retrieve Nachman data in one corner, and then my other one will do mutate landscape in the other corner, and maybe teleport a model or a unit of flamers or terminators to get the 4th corner for engaging on all fronts. So my game plan is very, very standard at the beginning of the game, and then I deviate from it based on what my opponent is doing and if I had to choose any different secondaries. You want to be thinking about what you're going to do in your opponent's turn. The only thing you really do in your opponent's turn is answer basic rule questions and sometimes roll armor saves. The rest of that time is for you to be deciding what you're going to be doing and also running numbers in your head. One of the things that's really important in 40K is being able to estimate what the kind of end result of a series of dice is going to be. And you don't want to be in the tank thinking, oh man, can my unit of 10-man flamers kill a 5-man unit of intercessors? That's math that you could have done in your opponent's turn or even done on an online calculator before the game starts. You should have a general idea of what your models are capable of and what the expected rolls are if they were to do an action or do an attack against a common profile. I'll link the specific website that I use for my own calculations below. Another thing that I see people losing time on constantly is kind of the order of abilities they have or spending CP. So for example, when I was playing Blood Angels, there's a lot of different rules that happen in the movement phase, or the end of the movement phase, or command phase, and if you forget one of them, well, you can't really go back, or certainly your opponent doesn't have to allow you to go back. And you want to make sure that you get all of those things done and do it in the correct order. So what I would actually do is I had a little cheat sheet that I would type out or write out that had all of the abilities my army did in the command phase and the movement phase and in the order that I wanted to resolve them in. And that way when I was playing a game, there was no thinking, oh, did I miss my chaplain's litany? Or, did I forget when I was supposed to revive a model with my apothecary? It's all already pre-written down for me, and I could just go down the checklist. There's also a lot of stratagems in the books we have. There are probably something like 40 stratagems in my Thousand Sons Codex, and I roughly use 5 of them per game. Now what I like to do is I actually like to pre-allocate and kind of determine what stratagems I'm going to use before a game even starts. Let's say I start with 12 CP and then I gain roughly 3 over the first 3 turns of the game. What I'll do is come up with a plan for how I'm going to spend 15 CP as Thousand Sons while I'm generating my army list and choosing my secondaries. Let's say someone's shooting at a rhino. Do I want to use smokescreen? Well, what I could do is come back to my sheet, look at what I was allocating my CP for, and instead of questioning, is the CP use, good, because it always is, you're using an ability, but rather, is it better than what I had already allocated my CP to? These are decisions you can make and allocate before the game actually starts and greatly reduce the amount of thinking you need to do during the game. The next phase is movement, and this is going to take more or less time based on the army you have and how precise you need to be with your movements. It's no secret that in Warhammer 40K the game comes down to centimeters or millimeters sometimes, and it's very important that you are precise with your movements and take time to do it correctly. The difference between being 12 inches or 12.1 inches away can easily lose you a game. So my first tip is that if you're really new and really struggling with movement and making these decisions is to play a slightly more elite army. It's no surprise that, a army with 200 orc boys is going to take more time to move than an army with 3 knights. But we can still speed it up a little bit more, even if we do play a little bit more of a horde army. The first of which is movement trays. These are not very popular, but they are something you can use. Basically put on all your models on a little dish, little plate or something like that, and you can move them all at once as opposed to moving all your individual guys. What we really want to do is focus on the important moves and the millimeter differences there. If you're really trying to stay out of threat range of an opponent's model, that's where you want to be precise. If you're just measuring your movements from some guys in the backfield about how they're going to sit on an objective to look cool, you can kind of speed that up a little bit. And ultimately, you can shortcut through a lot of these things by playing by intent. Now, I've made a video about playing by intent that I'll link here as well, and this is not an excuse for sloppy play or retroactively saying what you meant to do. Rather, one example that I use constantly is, let's say you charge some of your models into your opponent's models and you want to put them base to base. But because of the way the models are, climbing over their base and things like that, they don't fit perfectly to actually put them base to base. You can tell your opponent, hey, let's not do this jigsaw game of twisting around our models. I'm a millimeter away, can we just say I'm in base to base? And that's what I'm intending to do, so we don't have to spend all this time fiddling with our models. And that should be totally okay with your opponent. I've never met anybody who would argue against that. So playing by intent and being very clear with your intentions of your movement, making it obvious how it's possible or not, and doing the best you can is going to help speed up your movements. I also suggest getting some measuring sticks in order to make these things a little bit faster. It can be hard to determine if you're screening out units or not because tape measures can be kind of bulky and annoying. So if you get a stick or a pre-measured thing that is 9 inches long, which many of us have, what you can do and you can kind of use one of those measuring sticks to figure out very quickly, hey, can anything fall into a deep strike outside of this deep strike denial bubble? Or you can even get a stick that's about like 2 inches long, little melee gauge, and that can be really useful for determining the max coherency that a 5-man unit can, push apart. So I recommend getting some of those little movement sticks, as that will also help kind of speed up some of those measurements and deep strike denials, coherency, and things like that. I actually think rolling takes way more time than people realize. The first issue I see a lot is people take forever to count out their dice, and I'm guilty of this sometimes too. Let's say, you're about to take 30 shots with your dice, and someone's over there picking 1 or 2 at a time, getting their hand, shaking it, and then throwing it, right? But you can actually speed that up a lot by creating known blocks of dice numbers. So I personally do them in blocks of 5. So I know, hey, let's say I'm about to take 18 shots. Instead of counting out 18 dice, I just take 4 of those blocks of 5, take 2 out, and I have 18 immediately. And I can set those blocks of dice up during my opponent's turn or between rolls while I'm deciding. That will actually greatly increase the speed of which you're able to roll. And then just taking a more concerted effort about trying to roll faster. Now it's important that you still show your opponent, hey, here are all the rolls I got. I'll take out all the misses. Okay, nothing's wrong here. Pick them up and roll. So you still want to be very clear with your opponent on the dice rolls you're getting, which dice you're taking out, and what all the dice mean. But I think if you go in telling your opponent, hey, I'm going to try to speed up my dice rolls because it's something that I tend to take too long on. Let me know if I'm making any mistakes or I need to slow down. That will also help you a lot in making your opponent feel good about what's going on, as well as you speeding up your own game. And Games Workshop knows that rolling and re-rolling takes so much time, and they actually have taken a lot of those re-rolls out from 8th edition to 9th edition and tried to streamline a lot of it because it was taking and adding so much time to the game. And a final question you really have to ask yourself when you're doing a dice roll is, do these dice rolls actually matter? Now, in the beginning of a game, yeah, you should just be rolling everything and doing as much as you can. But if you're turn 5 of a game, and it's right on the edge, and it's a decision about whether you win or you lose based on a few key dice rolls, is the game going to come down to your las guns shooting at a rhino? Probably not. What probably matters is whether or not your one specific unit gets a clutch charge and clears another opponent's guy off an objective. So if you are getting down to the end of a game and you're also very low on time, you can choose to just not do things with some of your models. Maybe you don't move or even shoot with some of your guys. There are plenty of times where with my Blood Angels, I just didn't even shoot with, the pistols of my Assault Intercessors because I was just, trying to go through time, trying to do things as fast as I could, and the time it would take to roll to get maybe 1 damage was not worth losing the ability to actually charge and make an attack with a close combat guy. So there's some point where you have to just say in your mind, you know what, cut off all non-essential things. I only have to do what's going to score me these last points, and that's what I'm going to use all of my time to do. The last category is rules, and this is a combination of both rules disputes as well as rules checking. So I would say that if you're playing in a competitive game, there are rules that you should just know. You should not be quibbling with your opponent about whether or not you can actually make a 12-inch charge. Spoiler, you can't charge something more than 12 inches away, even if you would have enough movement to charge it. That's not how the game works. These are not things we should be quibbling about in an actual competitive game. Now, I'm not saying you have to be a perfect, player with knowledge of every single rule, but there are certain things you should know. Some more examples are things like the strength of a bolter or the range of one of your Dreadnought's weapons. These are things that we should just know before we get into a game. If you have to look up, the stats of the most common profiles in your army list, you're spending a lot of time that you don't need to be spending. Now, you can speed up the checking of some of these rules by printing out the actual data sheets of those models or the wordings of key stratagems so you can quickly reference them. But at the end of the day, someone may ask you, hey, I thought this stratagem or that rule was worded slightly differently, can you show it to me? You want to be able to go into your codex and find that rule very quickly. Whether that means you just know the page number off the top of your head, or you have, markers for where that rule exists, you should be able to pull it up very fast and be like, oh yeah, Cult of Duplicity, here's what the rule does, and you can show it to your opponent. Your opponent has every right to challenge a rule if it sounds bogus or if they've never heard about it, so it's on you to be able to quickly show them the rules. When in doubt, don't waste time quibbling with your opponent over a rule. Just raise your hand, call a judge, and get it sorted out by someone who can help you guys solve it in a neutral and diplomatic way. I briefly just want to thank all my patrons for their continued support, even though I haven't been making these videos as often as I would like. I am officially back. I've got the studio up and running, and I'm looking forward to producing a bunch more videos, getting into some specific tactical things, everything from missions to analyzing the new secondaries. So if that's something you're interested in, please drop a subscribe below. We're almost at 10,000, and I think if we get there, we may be able to start asking GW to sponsor us, and then maybe getting some early release rules and things like that. I'd love to make those videos for you guys, so please, if you have any other suggestions on how to play faster, put those in the comments section below, and I'm so glad to be back, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.